Hello, everyone. Know some of the faces here in other sessions too. So yeah, my name is Joachim Stroh. If you can't pronounce it, don't worry. I have so many different versions of that name. Originally from Germany, I grew up in Hamburg and studied in Berlin. But I live in Brooklyn, New York now. So I'm a co-founder of Hypha. We created the Hypha DAO about 4.5, 5 years ago, when we launched a movement called Seeds. So Seeds was one of the early regenerative currencies that we put out there, and we used something to coordinate our activities, right? That's what we built the DAO. And over the years, we refined the DAO and suddenly recognized, oh, that DAO thing is actually much more valuable, and other people can benefit from this kind of technology and platform. Right. So what we did is we put a lot of effort now into the DAO and said that's actually what we wanted to share with the rest of the world. So we're about to launch the DAO platform in June. We're still in alpha mode. And I want to give you some overview of what the DAO is in the context of sociocracy. I think they go hand in hand, and there's a beautiful marriage really of an enabler, not so much to technology, but providing a context, right? Providing a vessel for people to board and then go on a journey together, right? And that's the intention also with sociocracy, to find ways to bring people together on these beautiful journeys, right? And I'll show you how that goes. So for me, it's a session really more educational in nature, right? I want to tell you more about the scope and where DAOs are going. Because I believe DAO is going through iterations too. They're going through generations. Just like the blockchain technology went through the first generation, Bitcoin, second generation, Ethereum, we have some smart contracts, and then third generation blockchains that are now very energy efficient, right? And very fast too. Our DAO platform is built on a third generation blockchain called Telos, and we have recently moved to EOS. That's another very energy efficient blockchain. So let me show you some slides. So the way I want to structure this is maybe 20 minutes on the slides, then 20 minutes to show you actually how that looks like, so you get a feel for how can you work inside a DAO in this third generation DAO, and then 20 minutes or more for some questions and answers. And feel free to jump in at any time, right? Even if the slides, you have a question or so, I can certainly pause there, and we can reflect a bit more and go a bit deeper on the slides. All right, sounds good. Then let me get started. All right, go full screen. You all see the screen coming up for you? Excellent. So the topic is the tools that we're building for, I call it making sociocracy thrive. Again, for me, this is an ideal context, an ideal platform to embed a lot of the principles that you see in sociocracy within platform and DAO environment like what we were building here. So quick overview, I want to go over a DAO message here, and that's really leaning on Ted's book, For Many Voices to One Message. I think that's starting right there, right? So the similarity comes up on almost every slide there. Then diving into the DAO moment and the big picture. Actually, I want to start with the DAO moment, then talk a bit about the DAO structure and how these layers are working inside DAOs, and how the features really enable these layers there. And then some parts about segmentation, and that means how many people can actually use the DAOs and then embed the sociocratic principles inside the DAO and go on their own journey, right? So how that works and how that can evolve over time is the topic here. And then some DAO demo time, right? I'll show you how the Hypha DAO works, show you some of the other alpha participants. As I mentioned, we're going into beta mode in June this year. But for now, this is all alpha. It's a pretty stable platform already. And that gives you an idea of how this looks like, how that behaves like, and what else you can do there. All right, so let's get started. The DAO moment, right? For me, this is something, if you look at the internet, every 20 years, there's a fundamental shift going through the internet. 40 years ago, you had like the first iteration, the Web 1, right? The interactive web, really what Tim Berners-Lee created at that time. And then 20 years ago, you get to the Web 2 environment, right? Highly sort of commercialized web, a web that is driven by, big players, big centralization of data, right? Extractive, really, centralization of data. And now we're in Web3. Web3 for me is another big shift, a paradigm shift, that is happening towards a much more decentralized environment, a decentralized space, right? And if you look at the bigger picture on the left side here, we're really moving from this, what I call legacy operating system, right? Where you see corporations that were built for the industrial age, where you have competitive markets, linear money, right? Legal contracting, a lot of lawyers in this space, right? Hierarchical corporations, right? Towards, the DAO that is built for the information age. For me, this is what I call the DAO operating system, right? It's about living ecosystems, about circular value flows, about on-chain agreements, right? So this is the DAO moment. That is the shift really that is happening here that we see, and I think have been waiting for a long, long time. I mean, this is a juncture in time where everything comes together. Technology is here, but more so, the people's mindsets are shifting, right? And we're moving into a new space of cooperation and coordination. So that's the DAO moment. Let's dive a bit deeper, the connection between sociocracy and what the Hypha DAO is doing here. So as we know, here's a definition here I pulled up from ChatGPT that shortens a bit, that sociocracy is a governance and decision-making system, that emphasizes really transparency, equivalence, effectiveness, and decision-making way of power inside the organizations here, right? Really important. Apologize for the noise here in the background. I have a warehouse nearby. There's something going on. So the Hypha DAO on the right side, you see there is some tooling around the DAO, right? And when you concentrate that into, well, there's many voices coming together into one single song, right? And you have the tooling here that says, what is it that we can provide with the DAO, right? And it ranges from transparent governance systems, to trusted agreement spaces, to secure treasuries that can be multi-signed. And it goes on towards effective token and reward systems, and some participatory quests and badge systems, right? That's all part and pieces of that you can put into the DAO, right? So it's a container for tools and container for systems that you put together for your own needs, right? And that enables you to work and to sort of activate a new way of, really solving problems together as an individual organization, right? And as a collective of organizations. So let me jump into the bigger picture here in terms of the journey that you can go yourself on, right? So there's the DAO activation where it starts here, right? So we have the core team on one side, right? People coming together, forming circles in a very sociocratic fashion, and figuring out who's here, right? What kind of roles are showing up, and how we link these circles together, right? But the journey doesn't stop here, right? So here we go into the next layer, which is a community activation, right? What we've done with the DAO here is to say it's a both and situation. There's not only sort of a core team coming together, forming a kind of organization, right? And that can be anything. That can be, a community, can be a co-op, can be a village, right? A group of people coming together for a shared purpose, right? But then you go into, there's more to it, right? There's a community around it that gathers and wants to participate in some way. And you can do this. You can actually create a both and situation where you have the core team and a community space, both working hand in hand and trying to solve and tackle difficult issues. But again, it doesn't stop here. Now you can go a level up to say, how does it look like in ecosystems, right? Because now you have a whole DAO, a whole entity out there, and you can actually connect these entities. So it goes DAO to DAO to DAO, right? And that's where it gets really interesting for us to say, what kind of interactions are possible in the DAO to DAO space, right? What kind of value exchange, what kind of knowledge exchange do you see in these spaces, right? And that leads to a next layer, which is getting into civilizational shifts, right? This is when societies recognize, oh, we can actually do a lot more with new ways of coordination, right? Getting into sort of thriving networks here. That's the future. That's the vision. We want to push this forward, right? We're still here with the DAO activation and the community activation, and see as these DAOs coming online, right? And see the first iterations here of, oh, this is how they can interact, right? This is how they can exchange their value, and then move forward from there. If we dive a little bit deeper and zoom in really into what a DAO really looks like, here's a visual to say, okay, we have a core team, right? We have the circles here, And we have people showing up in circles, right? There's specific roles inside circles. And there are kinds of circles that we call anchor circles too. So anchor circles or anchor councils look across the circles, right? Where you have maybe a deeply functional circle here or topic-oriented circle, but then you have a strategic, alignment circle or council that can look across these different spaces. And then around that, you have this community space, right? We call that the community donut, where you can invite the community into a conversation, between a core team that's working on, say, specific projects, people that are committed in a certain role, and trying to figure out and implement things. And then you have a community space that's reflective of that, right? That says, yes, you're doing great things. Can I contribute in some way? Can I raise a proposal here and say, here are things that I can do better than what you're currently doing? So it's really this collective intelligence that you have there. And it's a way to say, there's so much more out there, and you can't just reduce it to a core team, right? So tapping into that community space is really essential to me. So you have that both and situation. But then it doesn't stop here, because you can have adjacent DAOs, right? And this is where it gets very organic, right? So you see, these spaces growing, and it's a very dynamic experience, right? If I look at Hypha DAO over the years, we've created circles, we've collapsed circles because they didn't really fit into the organizational structure. And then we created new circles, we created sub-circles, right? It's really an evolving and very dynamic tapestry, right? It's not, a boxed org chart any longer. It's something that changes, can change on a weekly basis, can change on a monthly basis, right? But important thing is it reflects the current energy that you have inside the DAO, right? And there may be other people joining the DAO, and they might see a need for another circle. And the DAO is here to reflect on that. The DAO is here to say then, okay, make up a proposal. We'll do some sense making and then vote on whether that circle is fitting into the overall structure. So that's a deeper dive into what the DAO is. I want to talk a little bit about the layering here. That came up in a conversation this morning here about the different decision spaces, right? So you have on the lower side here a very structured environment that's very goal-oriented, goal-focused, right? And that's where you have an organizational space, almost like a startup, but more centered around people coming together and then coming together for a reason, right? And performing some kind of a binary decision making, because for organizational spaces, you typically have a yes/no answer, right? And if you agree on something, you can move on, you can pull it off, push it off the table, and then get to work on other important items. But if you compare that to the community space, where it's more about coordination, assessment, evaluation, what's going on there, you have this non-binary space, right? And what came up this term this morning was superposition, right? So kind of a quantum superposition where it's not defined yet, but it's getting towards something, right? Towards an outcome, towards a decision, and things are floating to the top, and that's where it gets concrete, and then maybe turns into a project, maybe turns into some activity for the organization, right? And then it goes higher up, right? It goes into whole networks here that cooperate and cultivate and exchange value and information in these networks. The important thing to note here is boundary protocols, right? So if you go from one community space into an organization space and back, what are the protocols? How do you move people from one space to another? Can they apply? Can you all let them in? Again, that's a definition in our case for the DAO, right? The DAO can decide that and say, yep, we have an open community space. Anybody who shows up is in here, shows up in the DAO, and then we can get into some kind of interaction or some concrete work with them. So that's the DAO layering. Here's a slide on the DAO segmentation. And I wanted to give you this, it's a lot of text on this slide here, so I apologize. Just wanted to give you an idea how many spaces are affected by this new way of working together. And for me, that reflects also sociocracy diving into, say, socio-political spaces, right? So DAOs for democratic elections, future of cities, municipalities, major complements. There's so much going on. In the Hypha DAO, I was in Austin, Texas a month ago. And there was the INC, the Independent National Convention, right? And the independents are getting organized and they're wanting to find their way, to the primaries and to the next elections here in the US. And they're looking at the DAO as a platform to coordinate their movement, right? So it's an amazing enabler for them to say, hey, this is how we can actually get organized and how we build groups, build circles, reward people who are showing up there, and then move forward from there, right? And then it goes on and on, socioeconomic spaces. There's marketplaces out there. There's micro enterprises out there, like Hire in China has created this Renan Heyi, which is a concept of a micro sort of enterprise within an enterprise, right? And that looks exactly like a DAO would work. And we're introducing that in these contexts too. Socio-ecological, I mentioned the seeds movement and the seeds currency, and the strong sort of alignment with these bioregions, indigenous communities, biofarms, eco-villages that are out there. I was in Costa Rica earlier this year in Arenal, where there's a biofarm wanting to use a DAO to sort of hand over the farm and the whole operation to the next generation, to stakeholders who really take care of the environment, take care of the farm. And they see the DAO as an ideal vehicle for that, that they can use. Social-cultural too, DAOs for subgroups, solar punk, gaming guilds is something that's really attractive in that space, and some more. Okay, let me see what else we have. Maybe a quick look at the journey here. How do you begin the journey like this, right? Always a big question, because you have a blank slate in front of you and then, whoa, what's coming next, right? And this is very much like in Sociocracy. Where do you begin there, right? You have an organization in front of you. Maybe it's a very traditional, structured top-down organization. How do you begin to transition into something that's flatter, right? That's more inclusive and brings more people into the organization. So here we have, a starting point. We call that Genesis. You have a space, right? There's something called DAO out there, and you can invite the first trusted members, right? You bring them in, they build the necessary trust, they lay the foundation of the DAO, and then you can get to the first trusted decision, right? And the way you do this is you put up a proposal, right? So you say, this is something we should do. Maybe the first very proposal is a membership policy, right? To say, how do we let the others into this thing, right? And you put the proposal for that policy up there. You vote on this. There are only 3 people here, so these 3 people have then the voting power, and likely they will, be fully aligned, so there's full consensus in that mode. But then you move into sort of the first trusted circles, right? So you invite the others, create maybe an anchor council to overlook what is going on and deeply reflect on, things that are coming up in the other circles. And then you let the people in, right? And this is where they come in, they find their role, they find their circle, right? They find the others, and they begin to cooperate, right? They begin to sort of create their own, documents, their own, proposals, attract their own members for their circles, and could go deeper and deeper, right? So they can nest their own structures and they can make their own decisions. What's critical for me is really to say, how can we, push all of these decisions to the edges of the organization? Because we don't want to concentrate power. And it's a decentralized thing, right? At Hypha, we have no bosses, right? There's no CEO in the organization. Nobody can tell anyone else what to do, right? Can't shout out orders. So what do you do at the decentralized organization? It's a big reorientation. Some people who are coming to a space like this, they take time. They feel like, whoa, what's happening here? Or they bring a lot of baggage from their previous organizations, into this space, and have a hard time to reorient really and find their way. But after a while, once you can, and you recognize, yes, I have a voice, I can do things, and it is in this trusted relationship with the others, you'll find your way. And this is when things turn around completely. I mean, for me, it's been a journey for the last 4.5 years, 5 years. That was incredible. We've made so many decisions. Innovation was really going through the roof because you can bring up all of these ideas that are floating up, and you can seriously discuss them and move them into action mode. Okay, one thing about the DAO community, there is, to me, 2 spaces. I mentioned, you saw that in the zoom in slide, right? So there's a community space, there's a core team space. And for me, that means at the beginning, there's no alignment, right? There are a lot of community members out there with a lot of ideas, and there's some team members are coming together, maybe misaligned, and figuring out what they actually do. But over time, I think you can begin to sort of find this alignment, right? Find a way to say, here's some agreements, here's some documents, some bylaws we're creating, right? That brings us into alignment. And I think these two spaces are now sort of complementing each other, right? To say there's a strong alignment in the core team, strong alignment in the community. Let's bring it together into full alignment, right? We find ways to say, here's how we decide things inside the DAO, inside the core team. Here's how we decide things in a much more open, community space, where it's not about binary decisions any longer, right? If you find that out and you get that that level of alignment, I think you have a very powerful entity that is now ready to sort of interact with other entities out there, right? And provide their services, provide their ideas, and exchange their values with others. Okay, let me see. I have one more slides. David, how are we doing on time?
Right now, this is the beginning, 22 minutes.
Great. Okay. Let me maybe wrap this up here. Here's an example for, mentioned the sort of growth, the organic, almost biological growth of DAOs. The way we're building our ecosystems is by putting out an anchor DAO, right? And an anchor DAO has the ability to create sub DAOs or child DAOs. So in a way, it's like the mother DAO there that can give birth to these other DAOs that are more fractalized, right? More going into regional spaces, specific issues and topics, right? And attract their own people, attract their own structures and spaces. And that to me is like a process that's unfolding almost like an autopoietic approach, right? You set it in motion and it replicates itself, but it has everything it needs to go from generation to generation. And that's the beauty for me behind the DAO is that you can put it into one vessel, right? Put the principles, put the protocols into these DAOs and then see what happens next and how that all unfolds, right? Okay, so let me switch to the DAO so you can see a little bit how that looks in action, right? If people actually are showing up and then these decisions are being made in these new kinds of spaces. So we have our Explorer page here where we have all of the alpha participants, right? Remember, we still have the alpha stage, so we're moving into beta. But these are now DAOs that we invited in. They're mostly in the regenerative space, as you can see. And they help us to evaluate where we are, if anything is missing, all the broken pieces, so getting the bugs out of the system, right? And then once we're ready, then we will open it up to the public, probably again in June, July, when we see our first public launch here. But I wanted to show you a little bit here about the first DAO here, the Hypha DAO, and maybe the Seeds Collaboratory too. So we use actually a new DAO, called the Collaboratory for Seeds. We're rebooting the Seeds movement now, and invite people now into the roles and into the circles, and they're rebuilding the entire Seeds movement from there. Next step for them is to add the community back, give the community some ability to participate, right? For example, giving them badges. They could regain sort of a citizenship status inside the Seeds universe, right? And will be rewarded for that, and then begin the conversations and begin the interaction with the Seeds Collaboratory. But so here's the Seeds, the Hypha DAO. That's again the organization we use to build all of the other stuff, right? So we've been living and breathing the DAO, decentralized organization, for many years now. Gotten to know many people who joined us, and built really strong relationships. Actually, never. It was funny. Last year we were in the BMW Foundation Accelerator program, and that's after 3 years met some of my co-founders for the first time, in a physical event in Germany. And it was incredible, right, to see how the story unfolds, and everything already, or so much about the others, and it's just like friends, and you continue this when you meet them in real spaces. But so yeah, we're a virtual team. We're all over the planet. Most of our developers in central Mexico, in Bali. We have people in Europe, North America, Central America, and it's a global team. You know, this is really what a virtual or internet organization is all about. There are no more boundaries, right? People are coming and they're showing up, and it doesn't matter where they come from, with what kind of background. If they fit, you know, if they have something to bring to you know, this DAO, that's great, and they can apply their skills to many places inside the organization, right? So it's not restricted to just one place where you go, just my box, my desk, right? And then off you go. It's about sensing, you know, and feeling the energy inside the organization, see where do you see, you know, your work, your skill sets reflected, and then start working, right? Start doing something, start contributing, right? So you can see here on the homepage, you see the 39 current assignments. So assignments meaning people actually working in roles. And there are 11 badges here, 24 members, active members here, and 3 active proposals. And let me show you the proposal screen, because I think that's the most interesting one inside the DAO. The DAO, for me, I mentioned that this morning, is kind of an agreement environment, agreement space. You know, we're coming together to make these decisions, but they're coming out of a longer sort of process of sense making and making sure we are aligned before then the actual, you know, vote is happening, right? And a vote here in the DAO means you can configure your unity and your quorum. So here in this case, for the Hypha DAO, we created an 80-20 rule. Magically, this worked for 4 years. You know, we've got, you know, a lot of, you know, there were hundreds of decisions really we made inside the DAO, and this 80-20 thing worked beautifully. So 80% unity, meaning 80% need to be in alignment, in agreement with the proposal, and 20% of the organizational members need to show up, you know, in that capacity. You can see there are some active proposals here. You know, here's a strategic alignment council badge type. That's actually my proposal I created here. Here's a delegate badge assignment. Someone tested it out. Here's a policy, a membership policy for the council that I mentioned, right? So here's a way, here, let me open this up here. Here's a way to say, okay, I'm proposing a new policy here. It's a generic contribution to the organization. Here's what it means, you know, to become a member of the council, right? And here's some specific also about the Strategic Alignment Council to join that. Once we have enough people, see, you have 9 votes here, and we have 100% agreement, and 35% have voted to support that. So that's already way past the 80-20 rule, right? So more than 20%. So this will pass once the voting period is closing. So there are 3 more days. We have like a 7-day voting window for every proposal. Once that closes, then it'll be approved. And it becomes active, right? From that point on, you have a policy, right? And you can do this for anything you want in the organization, right? If you have a co-op, you put a bylaw out there, and all of the members can vote on the bylaw. And if it passes, then that's it. This thing is off the table, right? And you can focus on the next important thing inside the DAO. So DAO is really, in that sense, it's a single source of truth, right? It's where people are coming together to say, this is what we want to do together. Let's agree. Do we have agreement? Yes. And you can also, and that's interesting, you know, come to other kinds of agreements. You can say, maybe want to push up the unity to 100%, right? And then quorum even lower, it doesn't matter anymore. So if one person has a real concern, has an objection, it'll stop, right? It won't pass. So we can even reflect something like a consent-based decision-making inside the DAO. Or you can go majority voting to say, okay, 51% unity, 51% quorum, we're good to go, right? Or you can make it lower to adjust to invite more people into the conversation. So many ways of doing that. What we're also doing in the council is we have a consent-based decision process. So that means we invite people into the council, and then we don't do a vote, specific vote, because that will easily be overloading, you know, everyone with too many votes inside the organization. So we say we do a consent-based decision. So any objections we have, ideas that we come up with, we'll ask around the table there, and if we're good to go, then we've made a decision without putting that on chain, right? Without putting that in a record here. So it's up to the DAO really to decide what kind of records are there. So if you see here, we have, over 1,300 proposals that we voted on, right? You can see there are also things that are rejected. But it goes from, roles that people are proposing for, to badges, to new ways of working together here, to even to DAO agreements. That's something new we're trying now. What happens if you have two DAOs, right? And they need to come to an agreement. The classic way of doing that, of course, is you invite the lawyers, right? You create a contract, they sign the thing, right? You pay a lot of money for that, and then you have a legally enforceable agreement, right? We said, let's try something new, right? Let's put an MOU, a memorandum of understanding, into two DAOs, right? So put it in our DAO, put it on the other DAO. In that case, it's called local scale DAO. Same agreement, right? Same proposal. You vote, they vote. If both sides are passing, right? Well, then you're in alignment, and then you can go do your project, do your work, whatever it is. That has worked beautifully for us, and you really don't need a lawyer in that involvement. Lawyers are necessary if you get into some, more substantial, really difficult issues. Contracts were broken, something wasn't carried out. That leaves, other options for the DAO that you can legally incorporate, right? We're going through a legal entity here process now with called the LVC in Liechtenstein. But you've probably heard about other DAO sort of friendly incorporations. US has the DAO LLC in Wyoming. Utah has come up with a great framework for DAOs, and they're popping up, in many, many countries now. So you can see the support really growing for that thing called DAO is out there. What are we going to do with this? We have to embed it into our existing regulatory structures, right? And it is happening, and that's the beauty of it too. If you need it, it's there, right? If you don't need it, then you can simply say, we maybe not, live with an incorporation for a while. Here's another thing called Quest, if people want to run a short project, they run for a bounty, they can do this. Just propose a quest. And you have these tokens here. That's an interesting aspect I want to bring up, meaning you actually earn tokens inside the DAO. It's all tokenized. So what is this token thing? We have three kinds of tokens. We have the utility token here. That's the native token of the DAO. So you can earn Hypha tokens when you're in the Hypha DAO, right? If you're in another DAO, you will earn their tokens. And it really represents the value that everybody is creating, is adding to the venture, right? It's the value that you do create by contributing in some capacity, right? Through role, through a quest, through any kind of contribution. We also have a cash token, that says, hey, you can, contribute and earn liquid tokens, meaning they're almost like fiat currency, right? So you can take these tokens like Ethereum or Bitcoin, and then you can convert it right back to fiat if you want to go that route. And the third one that's really important for us is the voice token. So this is where you earn the voice over time. So any contribution will gain you more voice, will sort of build up your reputation, right? And will have an impact on the voting power you have inside the organization. And what's interesting in our case is that we also have a voice decay. So if you don't participate any longer, you step out for a year or two, right? Then your voice will decay. Eventually will go down to zero, and then you have to build it up again by sort of contributing in new ways, doing new work, new projects inside the DAO. So that was the proposal section, right? Yeah, I want to show you real quick how you create these proposals. You can do a contribution, describe it, and you submit it, and review it, and then you can save it as a draft so people can see it, and then you can publish it. And once you publish it, then shows up for everybody else to vote, right? We have recurring activities, so you can get into role assignments, you can go into batch assignments, and we have organizational assets where you define what these role archetypes look like. what these badges look like, and then people can directly apply for them. So it's almost like a template, right? And that's one of the features we're launching also in the next iteration, is a whole template for an organization. So if you have a co-op, there are certain standard sort of features that you see, or patterns really reflective of how DAOs look like a bylaw for a co-op or certain membership policies that should be there as a default, right? Put it into the template, and then you can quickly launch your DAO. So that's coming, and there's actually a few more proposals that we're looking at in the next iteration too. Something like a specific policy proposal, the quest proposal, helping people to step through beginning, middle and end, and circle proposals. So circle proposals will be interesting for budgeting purposes too. We can actually say any activity is now assigned to a circle, and then you can track that. And if necessary, you can look at what's available in the treasury of the DAO, and then create a soft budget or hard budgets for the organization. So that's another nice feature that, again, you can put right into the context of a DAO. Here's the membership page. You can see the many people who are currently in the DAO and who have contributed, over the past to help build this thing. And it's very fluid, right? So people move in and they move out. It's not like an employee-employer relationship, really. It's about members. It's about people who feel attracted to that mission and then help in some capacity, and then move on, move out, move into other circles, move into other organizations, other DAOs. That's all possible within that context. Okay, so I think that concludes my little demo here about the DAO as we use it today. Have used it, for many years, and there's more to come. For us, the goal is really to say we built this for everyone that wants to try it out. The what if scenario that Joost was pointing to in the Nestor tour, right? Let's just apply it and see how our organization might look like in a Nestor space, and here in a DAO space, right? And if it feels good, if it has the right energy, and you feel a transformation happening, that's great. If you want to change something, you can do that too. If you want to change how you vote, how you align, how you agree, you can do all these things, and find out the best way for you. And we're an open source, company that publishes the code. We invite other, developers to contribute and provide other modules that we need. We can't do this all on our own, of course. And there's so much coming especially in the DAO landscape. People want DAO services, they want accounting modules, they want almost like reflecting all of these traditional, systems that you see that became almost too rigid, right? Now we have an opportunity to loosen it up and say, well, how does this traditional performance management system look like inside a DAO, right? Where you don't have these performance pressures, right? There's no top-down, drag into, one-on-one performance reviews. How would that look like, right? And how can you look at people and come to agreements of, yes, that was a great, job you did, you fitted perfectly into that role. Please continue, right? And we want you to see you in that role. Or conversely, right? You can also say, no, that wasn't, the best role, and it doesn't best fit for you. But it's not like firing someone, right? It's about inviting people to look deeper, to see what else can they do on their own journey, right? Find other circles, find other DAOs where they can contribute and put their, passion and their skill sets to the fullest extent that they wanted to bring it, to the table. So yeah, let me stop here, and maybe we can come back to a Q&A session here, if that's okay, and then dive a bit deeper into what this is all about.
Okay, thank you, Joachim. We have a question in the chat from Ted. Is concrete question is who decides who, how is decided, and what the threshold is. I don't know, Ted, if you want to add more to this both questions.
Is the question clear, Joachim?
So you said who decides in what capacity and
Well, if you were mentioning earlier that you can choose the decision-making method, like, it could be like, here's what we need in terms of quorum and so on. So who decides that?
The DAO decides that. When I say the DAO, right, it's members who are present, right? It's members who have shown up since the beginning and have some kind of a role, some kind of an engagement with the DAO, right? So in our case, that's about 25, 30 people who are active inside the DAO. Now, when you make a change in a decision method, let's say you don't like the 80-20 anymore and you want to go to 50-50, something like that, you put up a proposal in the DAO and say, we need to change this, right? And the organization, all of the members respond to that, right? They can now say, yep, supportive, I'm now voting on this, using my existing voting method. It's funny because you have to do your old 80-20 before you get into the new 50-50, right? But once that passes, then we have an agreement, right? We say, yep, that worked. And then it's a simple administrative change, right? That you can do. And it's not an individual person really, right? To say, I don't like it, let me change that, right? Or there's some boss that says, I want to override the decision method you guys are using. It's not. You have to go through this voting method that for things that affect the entire organization, right? That's always this question in sociocratic circles, right? Where do you go to what extent, does it affect any of the other circles? Is it restricted to my own circle, right? In that case, you can make a decision within that circle, right? And so be it. And others don't even know that there was a decision that's specific to that circle is happening, right? But yeah, that's how we do it in the Hypha DAO and in all other DAOs, right? So it's this voting that's at the core of it. That decides if there's any significant change to the organization.
Okay. But do you want to add anything more?
Yeah, sorry, it's a follow-up question. So do I understand it correctly that it's not a case by case, but there is a general voting mechanism per DAO? The way, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, every DAO can decide its own voting mechanism.
Of
right?
course. So what you were saying earlier was kind of more generic about the options. It was not about how you do it. Did I just not fully grasp it? You wouldn't put out a vote and with every vote you put out, decide what the mechanism is by which you will determine.
No, that's right. No, we don't do that. That's getting into more, effective voting. You don't want to repeat this every time because there's a pattern you see that works for you, right? So 80-20 worked for us. Let's stick to that for now, right? And if there's a problem, then maybe we're going to change it and try something else, right? And see if that works. Yeah, but thank you for that question.
Mine's a follow-up question too, and Joachim, good to see you. My question is sort of, what if you wanted to use sociocracy, across the board in the DAO, in which case you wouldn't be using, like, switching around the percentages or even voting about that. You would set up a consent-based decision structure, right, kind of across the board. And that, I don't know if anybody has tried that with a DAO yet, but it's an interesting thought. And I don't know. Yeah, if you have thoughts on that.
Yes, for me, that's a great question, Kara, because that leads me to these templates that we're building now for organizations. And you can build a template that's pure, say, sociocracy or pure holacracy, right? And then if you do that, well, then you need some specific circle structure. You need some specific, link roles inside these circles. And you need a specific decision method, right? And it's possible to do that. The DAO can actually handle that boring part and say, okay, it's enabled now. Now you just enter the DAO and you use that kind of tooling that is available to you now, right? But you need to decide that again with the organization. Do you bring the full sort of pure sociocratic approach to that, or maybe it's a hybrid? For Hypha, it's always been some core principles we apply to the organization, but others we're more flexible, right? We say maybe we don't need the double linking ball, right? Maybe one person representing a circle could be enough. We call it the lamplighter from the Burning Man Festival, if you remember that, right? Where they represent the circles and they can show up in other circles if necessary. Well, thank you, Kara.
Okay, Antonio?
Yes, Joachim, thank you very, very much again for this presentation. It's been extremely helpful to me. My question is the following. If I would like to have the support to create something, to create a DAO from scratch, having a specific idea, knowing the ways that that idea could be developed. So I have a kind of a embryo of what I would like to see happening. Where can I go? Who can help? Is there any consulting? Is there any people? Is it still very amateuristic? Can it be purchased as a service? How can I move one step further?
That's a great question, Antonio. And we actually, realized early on that it's not enough to just give the software. This isn't like Notion or a Slack space where you just purchase licenses and off you go. This is so much more because you're building something together with others, right? Getting to really sort of purpose coming together for a reason and then building an organization. Let me show you real quick here. There are some slides in the deck here, and I will share that with everyone after the call here. We have what's called a DAO OS canvas. And that's what we call an activation process that we help DAOs go through. So we're doing this on a regular basis. Every 2 months or so, we have a workshop with current participants, and then we step them through these 12 squares here. These are sort of 12 fundamental building blocks of an organization. So something like, make this a bit bigger here. What's your purpose? What's the governance, the system you want to use? The question that Ted just had. What's the structure of the organization? How do you build that? What's the strategy? So in each one of these squares dives deeper into, okay, here's the structure discussion now. And how does that map to a DAO interface, right? And how does that map also to a sociocratic environment, context where you have a simple root structure, or you get into more decentralized, flatter structures, or even much more nested structures, right? And what's the journey in doing that? That helps you to find the mapping, right? That helps you to understand, okay, there's a structure in here that's nested, that's based on these circles. There's a community structure around it, right? And there's a relationship between the two. So what we're doing here is really to say, start your journey by looking at these different building blocks, right? And you can focus on a few of them only, right? You don't have to do the whole journey. What you feel is really important, if it's about, say, compensation, right? How do I reward people? Then dive deeper into this and say, okay, we have a contribution accounting system. Anything you do gets recognized and gets rewarded. And you get these 3 tokens, that are introduced in one of the sections there, where you have utility tokens, cash tokens, voice tokens, right? And then you dive deeper into what that means and how people are then being compensated in terms of salary bands, for example. Again, this is specific to the Hypha DAO here. We have 7 salary bands here. Other DAOs may have only 1 salary band, right? And that's fine. Or they go crazy and like Microsoft and create 20 salary bands, right? Who knows? But these are all sort of configurations and agreements, again, really, to say this is how we work together. This is how we want to compensate and reward people. And at the end of the journey, I think you have a beautiful, foundation, and that's important. You've talked about all these important things, and from there, you can take it on your own journey. You can adjust it to your needs. Other members will come and join you and see how they would be motivated and modify this framework, and you go from there. Did that help?
That helped very much. Thank you. And can I reach out to you? I mean, I'm sorry, I'm everybody's time. Sure. I've tried to connect on LinkedIn, and I'll try from there. Okay.
Sure. Yep.
Thank you very much.
There. Thank you, Antonio.
Okay, we have 2 questions from Neil in the chat. The first question is about privacy security. What's tech infrastructures in Hypha and its services dependent on, and where's the data?
So talking a bit about the architecture of the DAO, right, and the security. What's really important to see is this is built on blockchain, right? So blockchain means you have an immutable ledger at the bottom here, and I mentioned we're using EOS and Telos as the blockchain, and there's a sort of trusted layer here that says there are nodes in there that ensure that every transaction is recorded on the blockchain, and it cannot be altered. And as long as the blockchain exists, right, it will be there in 10 years, hopefully in 100 years from now, right? But what's also important, and let me show you something on my phone. We have what's called a wallet here, right? This is the Hypha wallet here. We can actually, go and scan every transaction. So that means you are the owner of the private key here. Nobody else has access to that. For me, the DAO is sort of leaving the era of username and passwords, that's Web 2 behind. And now it's about your transactions that you sign. If you see a signature somewhere, it's you, unless you shared your private key somewhere, but that's a big no-no. And you actually don't need to do this in this space. You create it once, right? It goes into your personal device, and it stays there forever, right? And that secures these transactions in a much better way than username and passwords that have all kinds of things. Hackers, hack into databases, millions of passwords and usernames are exposed. This doesn't happen in Web3 anymore. You can't do this because it's now down to these individual transactions that need to be signed, every time you do something in the DAO. And when I say transaction, that looks like a vote, for example, right? So if I go in there and say, I want to vote yes to that, that's a transaction. And I pull up my my application, my wallet, and then sign that transaction, and it comes from me, yes or no, it comes from me. If I claim my reward every week, I pull up my transaction, my wallet, and sign that transaction, and then I'm getting these tokens into my wallet, right? So I'm earning these tokens over time. And it's also interesting to see the tokens, do they mean anything? Well, yes, as long as you sort of build up your DAO and create value, these tokens will also receive some of the value. Myself, I'm earning 100% Hypha tokens. So I decided not to use any of the liquid tokens because that can drain the treasury, because you have to get them from the market, and that's real cash sitting in the treasury. We pay out our developers, much more in fiat tokens than in Hypha tokens, so they can pay their bills, right? And that's a fair way of saying, yep, as a developer, you may need more fiat currency as a portion of your token salary. Others who are more for the long term, right, who see the value that's being created, they may be okay to get compensated in Hypha tokens. So it's a mix, right? And it determines how you decide that going forward. So I don't know, was that enough for the question on security and how we build the system?
Yeah, he answered by chat, and he said that enough. And there's another question from him that is, where does the Hypha community of users gather outside of its own ecosystem?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mentioned every DAO has its own community, right? We're in the process of sort of building up our community. It's more, I would say, developer focused. These are people who are interested in the technology, the platform, because it's open source. So we're building out a larger community around that. Most of our conversations are happening on Discord. We have a Discord server for Hypha, and we have a Discord server for the community, for the Hypha community. And I can share that later with you too, so you can look at conversations there. And from there, it's really, what degree do you want to involve the community, right? Do you want to give them some awards? Do you want to give them badges? Give them some proposals to vote on, to be able to sort of create a feedback loop with the community. Because it's like any other software product, you want to reach out and see how it's perceived, how it's being used in these different use cases. Like I mentioned, the INC, but there are many other use cases out there where we do need to see what else is missing, right? What else can we bring into this vessel, into this context of building these movements, building organizations.
Okay, thank you. Thank you also for the mail and other questions. I have a question, Joachim. I would like to know what is, considering that you have experience of the world of DAO, what is your perspective for the next years?
Great question. Wow. Maybe next week, we can see what next week looks like. This is such a rapidly changing space. It's insane. For me, I think what happens if you look at the roadmap really of where DAOs are going next. I think that on the blockchain layer, you see some cross blockchain integrations, that you're not stuck in silos again, right? So you build it for Celo, you build it for Polkadot, you build it for Telos only, because you want to have this interoperability, right? That's really necessary, and the blockchains recognize that. It's a strong drive now towards the interop and towards a common platform that you can move tokens very easily from one to another. You can do that today too, but then you have to go sort of out of a blockchain into sort of a conversion protocol to some exchange that charges a lot of fees for that, right? And then back into another chain, right? It's really expensive in some cases. But if you have the efficiencies of a single blockchain or a blockchain that's interoperable, then there are no transaction costs, right? In the Hypha DAO, we don't charge any gas fees, right? It doesn't exist for us because these transactions are so efficient, right? And they don't take away too much CPU or memory power, that we don't need to charge for that anymore, right? And they're fast too, right? They're almost real time. When you go into the DAO, I vote seconds, almost like milliseconds later, you see a response. And you can see the results. This isn't written to some Ethereum chain that takes 2 minutes to process your transaction, right? Wouldn't be possible to create this kind of interface on top of it. But now this is possible, right? And this is the beauty of the blockchain, how that is now rapidly evolving. Every year you see really breakthroughs in that space. It's almost like the internet, when it came online, or broadband access, right? You couldn't imagine what's possible, a year or two from now. Same here, you can't really imagine how fast it moves forward. So for me, it's rapid development. Give you one example too in the decision space. Conviction voting is a very popular voting mechanism now for large community spaces, right? 10,000, 100,000 people. And we're working towards supporting these spaces, the sort of bigger community spaces, with more effective decision methods, right? That are not binary, right? But that help to sort of bring important items, that the community thinks, the collective intelligence thinks it's worthwhile to move forward to the surface, right? So things like that are there, besides the blockchain integrations. And new interfaces, really, right? I mean, we haven't seen anything yet. I think this is the beginning of a whole new evolution of what's happening on the internet. And other groups, other, players will come up with new interfaces, right? And we don't see competitors even in this space, right? For me, if I look at Aragon and Colony and all the others, Super DAO, that's great. We're all working on solving this together, right? Whoever has new ideas, let's bring it up. It's such a huge space here. It's like if you thought Web 2 was big, wait what's going to happen in Web 3,